episode of our regular program on our platform, the Lawyers Alive live streaming program. It's a general knowledge that the 23rd day of August of every year, the entire world come together to remember and celebrate an international day for the remembrance of slave trade and its abolition. We at Lawyers Alert has also keyed in with the rest of the world in commemorating this year's remembrance of slave trade and its abolition. And we have come up with a robust theme that is simply tagged Abolition of Slave Trade and International Human Rights. Today in our deliberation, we shall be looking at the ultimate origin of slave trade, the historical background of the concept slave trade, its causes, its effects, the solution, and how this falls under the umbrella of violation of human rights. Please sit back and enjoy today's program. I'll be your anchor person, and my name is Victor Eboh, Esquire. Now, before we get down to brass tacks, let us begin by way of fundamentalism. Doing that, we shall be looking at the question, what is the ultimate origin, the historical background of the concept slave trade? Going back in retrospect, we shall be looking at the year 1800. That was the year that started the concept of slave trading. In that year, 1800, slave trade was a cornerstone in Atlantic world. That is, what we refer today as superpowers, world powers. Before a nation can be guaranteed that, back in the days, it is determined by the number of naval ships that would convey slaves from one continent to the other. That determines the supremacy of a country. Great Britain and the United States of America stood large when it comes to the supremacy as a result of the availability of their naval ship. They had the means, the vessel, and the resources to convey slaves right from Africa and other provinces to the so-called New World, where the slaves are being taken over to plantations where they are used as human labor for cultivation, tilling the lands, and making rich certain slave masters. This became the trend in the early 1800s. And this trend became profitable. It was financially rewarding that so many countries keyed into the concept and benefiting directly from slave trading. Of course, Africa suffered the most out of this money-making venture. For the people were taken from their land into a new world where they are used as forced laborers and subjected to a high level of inhumanity beyond human comprehension. That was the trend in the 1800s. And this money-making practice continued for a whopping 7 years. In 1807, there was an emergence of what we call today a civil society group. A group of persons who are humanitarians sat down and thought about this concept of slave trading, how dehumanizing this concept is to the people they are subjecting to this level of futility. Thus, this group of persons that we simply going to refer to as civil society group beckoned on the powers that be, the authorities, on the need for them to end the berserk known as slave trading. But the superpowers back then, the Great Britain and the United States, saw reasons with these civil society groups and decided to put an end to the practice of slave trading. Thus, it rightly be said that historically, by 1807, there was an emergence of a legislation to put an end to slave trading, particularly in the United States and in Great Britain. Now, As a way forward to climb up to it, Great Britain in the year 1817 decided to enter into bilateral treaties with other countries that have also been benefiting from the concept of slave trading. These treaties was to encourage them to also extend the goodwill to their nation to put an end to the concept of slave trading. Of course, it was met with several stiff opposition because it was profitable, it was financially rewarding, and it was a money-making scheme for many slave masters. However, history also had it that by the year 1840, more than 20 nations had signed the treaty to put an end to slave trade. Happily, by 1860, slave trade has completely come to an end in the United States and Great Britain, such that there was a stiff measure to put punitive measures on anyone who still embarked on going to Africa and cutting people down to the United States. Happily, by the 19th century, precisely by the year 1900, the whole world would celebrate the end of the slave trade saga. That is the historical analogy of how slave trade began and what made it profitable and what made it sustain for so long a time. But while the world is celebrating the remembrance of slave trade and its abolition, it is safe to say that the United States of America and Great Britain were not solely responsible for the abolition of slave trade in the 19th century. There were several other factors that mitigated and ended and encouraged the end of slave trade in the 19th century. At this juncture, we're not going to go through this list and talk about those factors that were responsible for the end of slave trading in the 19th century. And one of the factors that comes to mind quickly is the change in economic world in the 19th century. Today, we talk about nations that has oil, that has gas, that have mineral resources. And these resources determine the supremacy and powers of nations today. Back in the days, slave trading determined the supremacy and superpowers of a nation. The more slaves you have, the more economic superiority you could boast over other nations. But today, that has changed. There is a change in economic powers or economic orientation of the world. Now we have discoveries of mineral resources like gold, like oil, crude oil, and so many others. So the world's direction has changed from gathering slaves to sorting after mineral resources. So that factor mitigated and encouraged the end of slave trading in the 19th century. The second factor is the emergence of civil society groups. These groups are persons that have genuine humanitarian concern for fellow humans, and they saw that the practice was morally unjustifiable, and that is why they were astute in their demands on authorities that be to put an end to the concept of slave trade. Thirdly, a third factor is the military policing. The military were involved in policing piracy and going after ships that are on the ground carrying out slave trading. And to be sure that this practice had a huge success, the military were involved in the seizure of slave vessels and condemnation of this ship to the courts. So they played a vital role in policing the sea and making sure that piracy was cut out completely as long as the sea was concerned. It's the fourth factor that contributed to the abolition of slave trade in the 19th century were the international legal actions. These legal actions led to the creation of international courts, like the courts in Sierra Leone, the courts in Cuba, the courts in Brazil, and the courts in other places around the Atlantic. These courts heard several cases that involved slave trading, and they tagged slave trading as an original crime to humanity. History has it that an estimated case of over 600 slave-related cases were heard at these international courts, and much over 80,000 slaves were set free by these courts. A fourth factor that mitigated the hushing or eradication of slave trading in the 19th century was the ratification of treaties. As earlier discussed, 1817 was a pivotal year because that was the year the seeming Anglo-American world power joined or embarked on a bilateral treaty with other nations to see that they also become signatories to the treaty to end human slavery. So there was a move to convince country after countries on the need for them to ratify the treaty against slave trading. But to crown it all, there was a massive compliance by these countries that a move was beckoned on by Great Britain and America to be signatories to the treaty against slave trading. So these are the factors that mitigated, that encouraged, that ensured the eradication of slave trading in the 19th century. Today, as rightly said earlier, the whole world is coming together to commemorate the International Day for the Remembrance of Slave Trading and its abolition, which is a welcome development. But one vital question still stands large. And the question is, does slave trading still exist today in our common era? Inasmuch as the 23rd day of August of every year is marked as an International Day of the Remembrance of Slave Trading and its abolition, the question still remains unanswered. Has slave trading been completely eradicated in our common era? At this juncture, I'll be making reference to Professor Jenny Martinez. She is the professor of law at the Stanford School of Law. In her book, Slave Trade and the Origins of International Human Rights, she says, and I quote, "Contemporary forms of slavery and forced labor remains a serious problem today. Some reputable human rights organizations estimate that there are some 21 to 30 million people living in slavery today." That is an alarming figure. 21 to 30 million people living in slavery today. So what are the forms of modern day slavery? Because believe it or not, even though people are no longer being carted from the province of Africa to the United States, we still have the vestiges of slave trading in our modern dispensation, and they come in various forms. We shall be looking at just two of them as they concern our body politic. One is human trafficking, and the second one is forced labor. These are examples of modern day slavery. Human trafficking is peculiar not just to Nigeria but other parts of the world. It is a common trend for an unsuspecting individual to come forth and put forth a very beautiful suggestions to the fragile minds on opportunities outside the province of the country. They tell them that in places like Libya, there are job opportunities, and these persons come forth voluntarily giving themselves over for such jobs, only to be traded away as prostitutes in other countries. This is a form of human trafficking and a form of modern day slavery. The second example is forced labor. It is not new for us to have opportunities where companies or countries extend somewhat free visa lotteries to innocent underdeveloped countries. And many persons key into this opportunity only for them to be taken to these countries and they are whisked away to plantations where they are being used as forced labor. This is another example of modern day slavery. Now, with all this deliberation, the question is, how does this constitute in any way a violation of human rights? Human trafficking, forced labor, do they in any way violate the human rights of the victims? At this juncture, we shall be looking at three legal frameworks as we'll be looking at the constitutionality and otherwise of the practice of modern day slavery, human trafficking, and forced labor. What does the law have to say as regards this ugly trend? So we shall be looking at three legal frameworks. First, we shall be looking at the domestic legal framework, then we shall be going at the regional legal framework, and finally we shall be looking at the international legal framework. Of course, when we talk about the domestic legal framework, we did not go far. We have our ground norm, which is the 1999 Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. This is the supreme law, and any other law that is inconsistent with the express provision of this law, that other law will, to the extent of its inconsistency, be rendered null and void. Now, Chapter 4 of the Constitution makes provision for fundamental rights. The combined efforts of sections 33 to sections 40 all talks about the guaranteed fundamental rights of human. For time constraint, we shall be looking at only one section of the Constitution, which is section 34. With kind permission, I would like to read directly from the Constitution. Section 34, subsection 1 of the Constitution reads, and I quote, "Every individual is entitled to respect for the dignity of his person, and accordingly, no person shall be subjected to torture or to inhuman or degrading treatment. 2. No person shall be held in slavery or servitude. And 3. No person shall be required to perform forced or compulsory labor." The provisions of the Constitution are clear and unambiguous. Slave trading, no matter the way it's branded, is unconstitutional. It goes contrary to the express provision of the Constitution and thus should be discontinued forthwith. Moving further to the regional legal framework, and at this point we shall be looking at the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. Nigeria is a signatory to this charter in 1981. But this charter did not become law in Nigeria until it was domesticated, enforced, and ratified by the National Assembly as Cap 10 of the Laws of the Federation 1990. Of particular interest is Article 5 of that law, and with kind permission, I would like to quote verbatim what Article 5 of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights has to say as regards this concept of human trafficking or slave trading. It says, and I quote, "Every individual shall have the right to the respect of the dignity inherent in a human being and to the recognition of his legal status. All forms of exploitation and degradation of man, particularly slavery, slave trade, shall be prohibited." The words of the Act are clear and unambiguous. It is wrong, it is inhuman, and it violates the fundamental rights. The third and final legal framework is the international legal framework. Nigeria is a signatory to many of the treaties, international treaties, on political, on social, on cultural, and economic, and so many of them. We are a signatory to many of these treaties. But one that comes readily to mind is the Yogi Carter principle that was adopted in 2006. That principle was developed at a meeting of the International Commission of Jurists, where it was propounded that a precondition to enjoying human rights is humanity. Therefore, every form of discrimination to any human must be discouraged forthwith, because fairness, equity, and universality are essential features of ensuring human rights. So all these legal frameworks put together all points down to one thing: it is inhuman, it is unconstitutional to subject any human being to any form of torture, any form of slavery, any form of forced labor, or any form of trafficking. It is wrong in the eyes of morality and in the eyes of the law. Now, with all this put together, it is sad to say that this ugly trend still permeates in our society, still permeates in our body politic. What can we do to map out this ugly trend? As it is often said, it is not just good to criticize, but when you criticize, you offer solution constructively on a way forward to cure the maladies. So what are the possible way forward to map out the ugly trend of human trafficking, forced labor, and slavery in our modern dispensation? Well, 4 elements have been highlighted as a way forward. Number 1, the lawmakers, the legislatures, which is the organ responsible for making laws in Nigeria. These lawmakers should consider making and implementing a more robust system for dismantling modern-day slavery. I repeat, they should consider making and implementing a more robust system for dismantling modern-day slavery. And how can they do this? The following suggestion comes into play. Number 1, there should be a system of property condemnation. When you catch a person who perpetrates human trafficking, then such person should be made to confiscate their property to the government. In this way, the lavish lifestyle that they put forth that entice innocent persons to join their train will be caught. As a punitive measure, their property should be confiscated to the government. Secondly, there should be economic incentive for whistleblowers. Persons who are willing to step forth to give out the identities of persons who perpetrate human trafficking, there should be a kind of protection given to them by the government. And when the information they provide turns out to be true after investigation, then this person should be rewarded forthwith. Back in the 1800s, while the military does their policing, any vessel they succeed in capturing that has human slaves therein, such vessels are not only confiscated, but the military share part of the pudding. The same can apply today, where whistleblowers can be made to also enjoy economic incentive. This will encourage more persons to give out the information as regards perpetrators of this hideous crime. Thirdly, NAPTIP, which is the National Agency for the Prohibition of Trafficking Persons, should be better equipped with modern-day facilities to track the traffickers. This will go a long way to help and assist the agency. And finally, there should be a creation of special courts for speedy dispensation of trials, so that when these perpetrators are caught, their matters can be dispensed forthwith speedily. If all these suggestions are put into consideration, then we will go a long way in not only celebrating a day of remembrance of abolition of slave trade, but we in our body policy will be eradicating, mapping out, extinguishing all the vestiges, all the elements, all the paraphernalia that goes with human trafficking to make our body policy a rosy body policy. Viewers, hope you have enjoyed today's deliberation. because this is where we'll be drawing the curtain on our deliberation for today. Be sure to stay tuned next time, where we shall be bringing you another robust topic to be delivered by another scintillating speaker. At this juncture, allow me to please sign out. I remain yours truly, Victor Eboh Esquire. Do have a nice day.